There is a number buried in the parliamentary record that tells you everything about the warship Britain just cancelled. £1 million. That is the total the Ministry of Defence spent on platform-specific design work for the Type 83 destroyer across 3 financial years. £1 million for the ship that ministers described repeatedly on the record as the future backbone of British naval air defence. The vessel that was supposed to guard the Royal Navy's aircraft carriers into the 2060s, the successor to the most sophisticated air defense destroyers Britain has ever put to sea. For context, a single Aster 30 missile, one round, fired once from the ship the Type 83 was meant to replace, costs more than that. So when the Ministry of Defence announced on the 29th of June that the Type 83 program was dead, the honest response was not shock. It was a question. How do you cancel a warship that was never really begun? And that question leads to a stranger one, because the announcement didn't just kill a destroyer, it killed the destroyer, the category itself. When the 6 Type 45s retire in 2038, the Royal Navy, the force that invented the modern destroyer in the 1890s, will operate none. Not a smaller class, not a delayed class, none. What replaces them is something no major navy has ever built. And whether that something is a masterstroke or a catastrophe is now the single biggest open question in British defence. To understand what died on June the 29th, you have to understand what the Type 83 was supposed to be, and why, on paper, it mattered so much. The story starts with the ships it was meant to replace. The 6 Type 45 destroyers, the Daring class, entered service from 2009, and for all their troubles, they remain among the most capable air defense warships ever built in Europe. 7,350 tons. The Samson radar, spinning inside that distinctive golf ball dome atop the mast, tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously. The Sea Viper system beneath it, capable of putting 8 missiles in the air in under 10 seconds. In 2012, a single Type 45 provided air defense coverage for the whole of southern England during the London Olympics. One ship, but the class carried a flaw in its heart. The WR-21 gas turbines suffered a design defect in their intercooler units, and in warm waters, the destroyers had an alarming habit of losing power, sometimes total power, mid-deployment. The Royal Navy has spent years and hundreds of millions on the power improvement project, cutting open holes to install extra diesel generators. At various points, most of the class sat alongside in Portsmouth rather than at sea. The Type 45 also carried a firepower problem that no refit could fix. 48 vertical launch cells. An American Arleigh Burke carries 96. China's Type 055 cruiser carries 112. In an era where the opening hours of a naval war might involve saturation attacks by dozens of missiles arriving simultaneously, magazine depth is not a luxury, it is survival. And British destroyers had half the depth of their allies, and less than half that of their most sophisticated potential adversary. The Type 83 was the answer. Formerly named as the Type 45's successor in the 2021 Defense White Paper, it was to sit at the center of something called the Future Air Dominance System, a network tying the destroyer to the carrier's F-35s, to land-based sensors, even to space-based assets. Ministers spoke of 70 to 128 vertical launch cells. Defense Minister Luke Pollard said in September 2025 that it would be minimally or optionally crewed, entering service from the mid-2030s. On paper, it closed the gap with Washington and Beijing in a single generation. On paper. Because here's what the Type 83 actually was in the physical world. Roughly £1 million of design work, inside about £6.9 million of broader concept spending. No hull, no steel order, no shipyard contract, no finalized requirement. Pollard himself admitted to Parliament that the current government had inherited the concept in an underdeveloped state. 5 years after being named the future of British naval air defense, the Type 83 existed as presentation slides and a line in a spreadsheet. The Royal Navy did not lose a warship on June the 29th. It lost a promise, and promises, it turns out, are cheap to cancel. What the Ministry of Defense announced instead is genuinely without precedent in a major Western fleet. The Type 45s will be replaced by at least 6 ships called Common Combat Vessels, the Royal Navy's first officially designated hybrid warships. First deliveries are expected in the early 2030s, and the 6 destroyers will not have their lives extended to wait for them. They leave service by 2038 regardless. Now, pay attention to what a common combat vessel is not. It is not a bigger destroyer. It is not a destroyer at all. The Ministry of Defense describes it as a control hub, a crewed command node whose job is to orchestrate fleets of uncrewed vessels above, on, and beneath the sea. Through automation, its crew is expected to number around 100. That is roughly half the complement of a Type 45, and a third of an Arleigh Burke's. Around each of these ships, the Navy plans an entire family of robotic platforms, each with its own type number. And those designations tell you how seriously the service is taking this. The Type 91, an uncrewed missile platform, essentially a floating magazine. The Type 92, an autonomous underwater sensing system. The Type 93, an extra-large uncrewed submarine. The Type 94, an uncrewed sensor platform, a robotic picket ship pushing the fleet's radar horizon outward. Picture the formation this creates. In the old model, one exquisite destroyer carried the radar, the missiles, the command team, and nearly 200 sailors. Every function and every vulnerability concentrated in one hull. In the new model, the crewed ship sits at the center of a web. The sensors are miles away on a Type 94. The missiles are on a Type 91 that no sailor has to die aboard. Kill the picket and the network reroutes. Empty one magazine and another barge slides into position.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer, unveiling the plan, described British frigates intercepting a Russian vessel in home waters accompanied by outriders, uncrewed ships above and below the surface. Defense Secretary Dan Jarvis called the CCVs hybrid ships, designed and built for the increasing threats we face, and confirmed they will be British-built, sustaining shipyard jobs for decades. Industry is already circling. BAE Systems showed a concept at DSEI 2025, built around an air warfare command ship, possibly evolved from the proven Type 26 hull it builds on the Clyde, paired with 100-meter trimaran drone escorts carrying 32 missile cells each. Babcock is pushing a rival approach based on its Type 31 frigate. Either way, the CCVs will slot in alongside the 8 Type 26 and 5 Type 31 frigates already under construction, and anchor 3 new operations aimed squarely at Russian activity in the North Atlantic and High North: Atlantic Bastion, Atlantic Shield, and Atlantic Strike. That last detail matters because the timing here is not academic. London has recorded a 30% increase in detections of Russian vessels near British waters over the past 2 years. The undersea cables carrying most of Europe's transatlantic data and financial traffic run precisely through the waters these ships are meant to guard. So why did it happen? Why does a navy walk away from the ship type it invented? The first answer is the oldest one in British defense: money. And the political wreckage around this decision tells you how brutal the fight was. On the 11th of June, 18 days before the announcement, Defense Secretary John Healey resigned, accusing his own government of neglecting defense funding. His successor, Dan Jarvis, clawed back roughly an extra £1 billion, lifting the settlement to around $14.5 billion. Officials had previously said the full program needed $28 billion, half. The Ministry of Defense got half of what its own planners said was required. Something had to die, and a paper destroyer with no steel cut, no contracts signed, and no constituency of workers to defend it was always going to be first against the wall. The Type 32 frigate went with it. Meanwhile, the programs that survived, the Dreadnought ballistic missile submarines we covered in a previous video, the AUKUS attack boats, the Tempest fighter, are precisely the ones too far along and too politically protected to touch. But cost is only half the story. The other half was written in the Black Sea. Regular viewers will remember our video on Ukraine's drone war, and the numbers bear repeating here because they are the intellectual foundation of everything the Royal Navy just decided. Ukraine, a country whose conventional navy effectively ceased to exist in 2014, has destroyed or disabled over a third of Russia's Black Sea fleet. It did this with aerial drones, with missiles, and above all, with uncrewed surface vessels costing a fraction of 1% of the warships they sank. The Moskva, the flagship, killed by missiles from a coastline that Russian admirals considered defenseless. Landing ships gutted in harbor. The remainder of the fleet driven from Sevastopol to hide at Novorossiysk. And as we covered recently, not even that refuge has held. Every navy on Earth watched that happen. The Royal Navy's conclusion was the most radical. If cheap, distributed, uncrewed systems can destroy a conventional fleet, then perhaps the future belongs to the Navy that commands those systems, rather than the Navy that builds bigger targets. There is a contrast buried in this story, and it is worth pausing on. China is currently building large destroyers at a rate comparable to the rest of the world combined. Even North Korea launched 2 destroyers in 2025. The United States is pressing ahead with DDG,
Almost every serious navy looked at the same evidence from Ukraine and concluded the answer was more air defense ships, better protected. Britain looked at the same evidence and concluded the answer was to stop building them entirely. One of these judgments is wrong. We do not yet know which.
Because here is the uncomfortable arithmetic underneath the optimism. And this channel would not be doing its job if we skipped it. The common combat vessel does not exist. Design work is only now beginning. The Defense Investment Plan funding allows the National Armaments Director Group to start, not finish. The first holes are promised for the early 2030s, which gives the program less than a decade to go from blank page to commissioned warship. British naval procurement has not moved at that speed in generations. The Type 45 itself arrived years late. The Ajax armored vehicle spent a decade in development purgatory. If the CCV slips, and almost everything slips, the Type 45s will still retire in 2038, and the gap opens with nothing to fill it. Then there is the harder problem, the one the glossy announcement did not dwell on. Today, the Type 45 provides Britain's only sovereign naval defense against ballistic missiles and the upper tier of air attack. Nothing announced on June the 29th is confirmed to replicate that. Analysts have argued, almost universally, that no autonomous architecture yet demonstrated anywhere on Earth can substitute for a purpose-built air defense destroyer in high-intensity combat against a peer enemy. The specialist publication Navy Lookout, broadly sympathetic to the hybrid concept, still called the plan a gamble and warned that Britain is surrendering its premier air defense platform at precisely the moment ballistic and hypersonic threats are proliferating. The Shadow Defense Secretary, James Cartledge, dismissed the whole package as too little, too late. The technical questions stack up quickly. A distributed fleet lives and dies on its communications. Jam the data links, and the Type 91's missiles have no eyes, and the Type 94's radar has no shooters. An adversary could hunt the uncrewed pickets one by one, each loss cheap for the defender to absorb on paper, but each one peeling away a layer of the shield. And the North Atlantic in winter is one of the most violent sea states on the planet. Whether 100-meter uncrewed trimarans can keep stationed there for weeks, unmanned and unrepaired, is a question that will only be answered by trying. And there is a quieter cost, one measured in what warships do during the 95% of their lives that involve no combat at all. A destroyer evacuating civilians, running disaster relief, showing the flag in a foreign port. These missions need people. An autonomous missile barge can do none of them. Britain may end up with more combat mass and less navy. The government's answer to all of this is essentially the one Housing Secretary Steve Reed gave when pressed. The country must prepare for any future war, not the last one. It is a fair point. It is also exactly what you would say if you simply could not afford the alternative. Now step back and look at what this moment actually is. In 1893, the Royal Navy commissioned HMS Havoc, by most reckonings the first true destroyer ever built. For 130 years, through 2 world wars and the entire Cold War, the destroyer sat at the center of British sea power. Convoy escort in the Atlantic, radar picket off Okinawa, air defense sentinel in the Falklands, where the loss of destroyers to Argentine jets taught a generation of officers what happens when the shield fails. Britain has now decided that story ends in 2038, not through defeat, through a wager, that the Ukrainian lesson generalizes, that command of machines will matter more than mass of steel, and that a country which can no longer afford exquisite warships can outthink the navies that still can. If the bet pays off, the Royal Navy of the 2040s will be larger, stranger, and harder to kill than anything 6 Type 83s could have offered. A web of ships and machines where sinking any single hull achieves almost nothing. If it fails, Britain will face the most dangerous maritime environment since 1945. With 19 crewed escorts and a fleet of prototypes. Sometime in 2038, the last Type 45 will make its final entrance into Portsmouth. The Samson radar, the spinning eye that once watched the skies over an entire Olympic Games, will power down for the last time. And for the first time since Queen Victoria sat on the throne, the Royal Navy will sail without a single destroyer on its list. Whatever takes station in those waters next, will be watching the sky through eyes that no sailor has ever looked through.